this is a whole universe. Eric's like, what is happening? This is real? Like, what the
I'm here with Justin Beahm, who is, I don't even know what title you actually use, but we'll just say the owner-operator of Reverend Entertainment, who seems to be producing the vast majority of titles in my collection lately. Justin, thanks for coming on here.
Thank you, Ryan. I appreciate you asking me to come on. Thank you.
I mean, it's hard not to. If I was thinking about this earlier today, if I started to break down the number of discs that individuals had their hands a part of, you would be a large part of this collection behind me.
Oh, that's an honor, man.
Kind of crazy how much you've been affecting these last handful of years.
It's been wild. It's such a, it's an insane, it takes me back to, my immediate thing is to say Johnny Carson, but I think it goes beyond that. It goes back to maybe Ed Sullivan's show when they used to have this guy come out and he had a bunch of sticks and he'd have plates and he's spinning and he runs over and it's like I have all these plates spinning all the time, and it's a wonderful problem to have, and only a few have fallen and broken. So I'm super grateful for all the opportunities that I have, and I'm just an eternal student of everything in life. And so the more I do, the more I learn, and I just continue to grow in ways and push myself, and it's really exciting to always have the diversity too, with I'm sure what we're going to cover here today. There's such a wide range of genres and types of projects and stuff. So it's a true honor to be part of all of it.
Well, and just by definition, the idea of film is full of diversity, perhaps more now than ever before, obviously. But what you're able to be participating in has changed throughout the years, has grown, has developed, I'm sure. And with film, your passion for it, I'm sure, has changed throughout the years. Can you share where all that started for you?
Just as a kid growing up with parents who were very open to renting stuff, they didn't ever foist their interests on me, I guess you could say. So it's not like I had a sports-driven dad who made me love the Packers or something, or he only watched Chuck Norris movies and then you can't watch whatever else. It wasn't like that at all. And so there was a certain freedom that came with that. As a kid, it was nothing but discovery, because I was completely open as a result of that lack of influence, in a way, that I walk into these video rental places and it was the most amazing art gallery. And it really was blind renting left and right. And I was fortunate enough to have rental places like Farmore, which offered, I think, 5 tapes, 5 days, $5 or something like that. So you could really load up with a lot. Yep. And then my friends and I would have sleepovers constantly, because I was an outdoorsy kid. I played every sport when I was little and spent summers I was hardly ever inside. But when I was, it was like my brother and I watching Saturday morning cartoons, and then we'd be invisible for the day. But that night we would be watching movies. And so I discovered a lot through that process of just, that cover looks interesting, I'm taking it home. And then I had a friend who subscribed to Fangoria magazine when I was a kid, and he used to bring them into school for me to take a look at. And that's the first time the veil got lifted on, there's a process behind this. And that was captivating instantly. I was completely, just taken by the idea that each one of these things is genuinely different in its construction. There are general frame pieces to everything, of course, but learning that different artists approach this all different ways, it was like different authors, and that's endlessly fascinating, because any book you pick up is a whole new universe. And so that's really when, to your question, the deeper discussion, the deeper consideration for something beyond just a passive viewing really began around that time. And it was courtesy of Fangoria. And then as time went on to Famous Monsters of Filmland and continuing to explore. And my parents had this book. The one thing my parents did do for me in the film world was they had this book. It was called I don't remember what it was called, the Movie Guide. I have one of them. I found one year. But anyway, each year they'd put it out, and it's like a Bible. Nice. And it wasn't very big, but they would have it in the pocket of Dad's lazy boy chair. And it's just a bunch of movies that are on video and the reviews of them. And I quickly learned from that book that everything I found interesting, they were rating a turkey. There's literally, it was like the scale was turkey to 5 stars. And so I'm like, okay. So I started my notebook making a list of every turkey movie I could find in this guide. And then that became kind of my guide as I went to the video store and were looking for things. Cause that's everything. They hated everything horror. They hated everything genre or anything outside on the fringe at all. And so if I had any kind of a guide, it was the turkeys in this book that my dad had. And of course he had no idea about any of that, but yeah, that's really when it began.
That's awesome. I love that. Not only was it something that was able to elicit this idea of discovery, but you weren't turned away from the fact that they were rating them poorly, because many people would come across with that like holier than thou attitude of, oh, well, I'm only going to seek out the 5-star ones for sure. And you just took it the opposite way and went, no, I'm loving these low ones. I'm going to go find all of them.
Yeah, it really was. It was a lot of it was due to TV that we had. I grew up in a house without cable.
Yeah.
And so a lot of the public domain stuff was on our PBS station on weekends and things. And so I discovered the Universal monsters at the same time as Plan 9 from Outer Space. And those movies were just hand in hand to me.
Yeah.
I didn't see levels of quality. What do I care about? What do I like?
Right.
What's interesting? What's intriguing? And so I grew up without any kind of critical viewpoint on anything, really. I don't remember ever not liking a movie for anything other than it just maybe bored me, which I still think is the greatest crime a movie can commit. Really, it's kind of one of the only crimes that a movie can commit, in my opinion. And so that openness led me just, it was without boundaries, without barriers. There was no walking me away from stuff. And when you're reading the brief synopsis, and I'll grab this book in a minute here to show it to you, but when you read the brief synopsis of these movies, it became clear. You didn't even need the turkey. It became very clear what was going to be great. And it was going to have spaceships, and it was going to have Bigfoot, and it was all this other stuff, monsters and ghosts and whatever. I mean, so maybe that's actually, now that I'm saying this out loud to you, I'm realizing I've never been a fan of reviews. I've never written reviews. I've never participated. Even in all my years at the magazines, I was just doing features because there's a lot of incredible reviewers out there who do the job really well.
Right.
But I've never needed or desired that kind of guidance, I guess you could say.
Yeah.
I would rather bump into something and not really care for it than be shied away from something and not know.
Yep.
So that continues. And I think that was really born from that book. And those turkeys.
So I posted this video with William Bibiani, who's been a critic for years. And one of the things we discussed was film criticism at its heart really is more about helping others discover films, because you find somebody that your tastes are similar, rather than I'm trusting this person to dictate that I should go watch this specific movie or not watch one.
Yeah, that's good. That's really good. I maybe it's just because my sense of adventure is so such a guiding light for me,
right?
In everything, because I want to experience as much as I can in this life,
Same.
you know, and so maybe that's why I've never really sought out any kind of real guidance on this stuff. Of course, but that being said, of course, like everyone else, I have lots of friends who led me to things. I have one of my best friends when I was a kid introduced me to so much music and literature and stuff that I never would have known if it wasn't for him. And so I can point directly to him as a resource for helping me discover all that stuff. And we all find things some way or another because we're in the vicinity of it, right? So, but that, I mean, I just, the film criticism thing, there are some, the voices that I enjoy and that are relative to that sphere are the voices that are really distinct.
Yeah, that's true.
I want someone's take on something. I don't want someone telling me what's good and bad about it.
Same.
Those are the guys that I like. So.
And the hard thing nowadays is because the internet has democratized all of this, there's so many voices that shouldn't have that voice, to be completely frank.
Well, I'm a firm believer that everyone should. I'm very democratic about my opinion on that, because I think that it's just like you said, while everyone has an opinion, everyone put their toe in the stream at some point.
Right.
And that's for everything. And especially if you have a taste that's kind of off the beaten path, it may take a while to find someone that you really trust.
Yeah.
I've heard so many stories and interviewed so many people over the years who talk about having maybe a video store clerk that they really trusted. And like, oh man, I would, yes, I went to 8 different stores, but there was this one guy, Ricky at Video Palace or whatever it is. I knew if he had it on his wall, I was going to love it. And I think that those voices are important for us for sure, but it can take a while to weed through that. And it may be through some link to a link in a comment, and someone says you should check out the reviews of, and then you end up on someone's blog. And that's where I found so much of the most amazing stuff, because it's completely unfiltered. It's not through any kind of editor process, for better or for worse. And I love that raw perspective, just in writing, just in journalism in general. So I'm a huge proponent of whoever getting out there and sharing whatever they want to share on stuff. And we have the ability to not pay attention to those voices we don't feel comfortable with or enjoy. And I think that's a great thing about the internet too. The block button.
I fully agree there. The only ones I'm really alluding to that shouldn't have it are the ones that are so off-putting about everything. And unfortunately, with the social media aspect surrounding physical media, there's a lot of toxic ones that are literally just, for some reason, they have a platform about physical media, and every single release seems to be shit. I don't understand how that's the case.
I know what you're talking about. So this is like the bit rate and things like that, where they're talking about that stuff.
That's one aspect. That, or if you like this film, you're basically a bad person, which there's a lot of that going around too.
Yeah. I mean, for me, I read that voice once and I'm like, okay, now I know who not to listen to and whatever. So
the hard part is it will genuinely turn some people off. And I on this channel, I tend to go with this mantra that I've repeated too many times, and people watching this are going to sigh because they're going to hear it again. But I've always said that every single film has been somebody's favorite film. Yeah, no matter how much you may hate it or your neighbor may hate it, even if it's the director for 20 minutes after he made it, it was somebody's favorite movie for a while.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. And that when I was working with the Halloween films, there were some fans who just really loved Halloween Resurrection. That's where they had, that was their entry point to the franchise. And they may love the rest of the movies too, but you know how that moment of discovery, back to what we were talking about prior to our recorded conversation here regarding family and things like that, that moment of discovery, I think, is so crucial. And that's something that a lot of us who grew up in the golden age of video and of the early DVD boom and then into Blu-ray, the layers of evolution to this whole thing. Yeah. We look at that, and I think a lot of what we love about it is that it allows us more access to what we fell in love with when we first fell in love with all of this. And now that led us to the watering hole for whatever came after that. So
some of those experiences, they'll burrow in your brain because you had to really hunt for that discovery. And so it meant a lot to you as a person. Maybe it was the only weekend for 6 months that you and your family could get to the rental store. And because of that, you got to watch this thing like 9 times and you really love this one movie. So so some of these, when we're getting the opportunity, like we're going to talk about Blades in just a little bit. Some people saw this years ago, and that was something that they're like, man, I remember this one movie where there was like this crazy lawnmower thing. I don't know anything else about it because I haven't seen it in years. But now all of these companies are giving that opportunity for discovery.
Yeah. Yeah. It's really incredible. And I think that there's a lot to be said, not just for the companies that are doing the boutique releases now, like the Vinegar Syndromes and whoever else, but also the guys like the Mill Creeks, who had those box sets of the 50 drive-in classics. And, you know, they had all those great cheap dollar bin, like $10, and you're getting 50 movies or something. That was kind of the bridge between all the blind renting I talked about in the beginning of this conversation, going to Farmore or wherever else and renting all this stuff based on the cover. You could just not feel bad about it, and you would invest from front to back. And the Mill Creek boxes, for such little investment, were walking people through all kinds of exploitation, weeds and greenery and wonders and horrors and everything else. And it's like, all right, well, we just flip to the next disc and we keep on moving through this thing. And now streaming has a kind of equivalent of that too, with so much available to us. So it's interesting, but I think it's important that we keep exploring and that we don't just stop. Because if you would have gone back in time, if any of us would go back in time and Back to the Future, meet our young selves and say, when you hit 30, you're going to stop buying new music, and you're only going to watch slasher films from that point forward. you're going to be like, what are you talking about? There's this whole
Devastating.
universe. I would be crushed if I thought that that was the case.
Yep.
And so I think we need to keep that openness. I really encourage people to maintain that. And I love that these labels offer that.
Completely agree. Let's bring it full circle then. Where does Reverend Entertainment come into all this? And for those that don't know, what exactly is Reverend Entertainment?
Reverend Entertainment is my production company, and it was such a roundabout way that I ended up involved with all this stuff. So I was writing for Fangoria and Famous Monsters magazine and a couple others, and I ended up doing a article that I didn't end up finishing on the Halloween 4 through 6 arc. And I ended up interviewing Malik Akkad for that, whose dad was Mustafa in the whole Halloween universe. Right. So Malik and I hit it off, and then we became fast friends. And then we fast forwarding here, we co-founded a nonprofit together. I ended up working for the company and all this other stuff, which opened my eyes to the world. It opened me to learning about distribution and international licensing and merchandise licenses and mask approval and all this other stuff. I mean, it was like a crash course in the business side of film from like the producer perspective, really. And for that, for the Halloween universe, we decided to do Halloween 4 and 5 for Anchor Bay on Blu-ray, because neither of them at this point, maybe 2010-ish, 12, I can't remember what year it was, but they hadn't yet made their way to Blu-ray. There have been some great DVDs, but we were ready for the next format. And so initially Anchor Bay just wanted to do very bare bones releases, but I pushed for something. And so I thought, well, let's do something for each, with commentary for each. And so I got Dwight Little on 4, I got Don Shanks, Michael, on 5, and then did those commentaries. And those are the first real pieces that I produced. Reverend didn't exist at this point. It was just me. It's still pretty much just me. But but that ball started rolling then. And then I met Cliff and Jeff at Shout Factory. They came up to me at a convention that I was at and started talking about this Scream Factory that they were going to launch. And they had this list of titles. And they're like, what would you do if you could do something? And I pointed to Taint Girl, which I love that movie. I've been long obsessed with it. And I pointed at, what else was it? I think it started with Taint Girl. And then I was brought in by Michael Felsher on Town That Dreaded Sundown to do commentary. And then on Prince of Darkness as well. So I did Alice Cooper and John Carpenter on that one. And then the wheels were really moving. And at this time, I was hosting a lot of stuff too. So I ended up meeting Felissa Rose at the Big Bear Horror 5 Film Festival, which sadly is no more. It's an amazing event up in Big Bear, California, in my precious mountains up there. And we hit it off and got to talking. And anyway, long story short, figured out that we could probably take Sleepaway Camp somewhere. Like, it didn't have a home at this time. And Anchor Bay had critically flubbed a box set release on the film and its 2 sequels, and then sort of lost footage of the Survivor thing. Right. It's a neat set, and the Survivor's really the real catch in that thing. And it was just cool to have them at all. So I still have it. I still have that one. But the Sleepaway Camp that was on there was horribly cut. I think it's missing several minutes of footage in it. And so we wanted to find a good home for it. And I had been doing this stuff with Shout. And so I contacted my guys, Cliff and Jeff. I said, would you guys want Sleepaway Camp? And it was like, yes. So that was a quick process to get that thing underway. And then that became the first release that I full-fledged front to back produced. And Reverend it's a name that I just kind of came up with as we're in the editing suite on the day that we were, because at that time I wasn't cutting my own stuff. I was working with this great editor, Justin Cruz. He's just incredible. I mean, supernaturally talented, and on to he works with DC and all this stuff now. Nice. But he was the first to really put my hands on the keyboard and go look, you can do this, try this. And so we walked through things on a couple previous releases, and the rough cut of the Sleepaway Camp I assembled myself while he was out doing other stuff, and he came back and then we tightened it up, and he added all this amazing stuff to it. And and then at the end, I needed to have a name at the top of it. And there was some advice that John Carpenter had given me years prior during a conversation for Fangoria, that he's like, the best thing you can do, he's like, make sure you put your name on what you do.
True.
He said, if I wouldn't have done that on Halloween, no one would still probably know who I am. So he said, if there's one thing you do, it's please do that. And so I made a point to do that. So if you look at Sleepaway Camp, Justin Beam's Reverend Entertainment, and I've kept that above it ever since, just heeding John's advice. If there's one person I can take advice from, it's him, right?
Wow.
And then from there, it went nuts. I mean, and through John, I talked him in because he was sitting on Body Bags, which is a film that he had produced for Showtime and that he and Toby Hooper did, primarily John and his wife. And so at this point, this is just as the Carpenter stuff was starting to be talked about at Shout.
Right.
Then I got John on board with, well, maybe we can get Body Bags a safe home. And he didn't trust anyone to touch it because it had been horribly fucked up by Showtime. With art that had nothing to do with the movie on the box that he hated. And so that was the one caveat. As long as that art isn't there, we can probably make this happen. And so then Body Bags happened, and on and on and on from there. So that's where it began. And it really remains very similar to how it was, 10 or 12 years ago or whatever that was. It's mostly me. I have great crews that I shoot with, like Mark Savage is my DP from heaven. He's a really close, loved friend of mine, and also just a creative co-pilot in all this stuff as my DP. And I've had some great editors that I've worked with historically, but now I do all the cutting myself. Wow. And so it's wearing a lot of hats, but it's very creatively satisfying, especially as I mentioned earlier, just continuing to grow and learn and get better at things and little tricks. And it's really fun for me. So that's the long-winded version of the Reverend story.
We're going to get even more long-winded then. One of the things that we seem to get asked a lot in the comments on these is, when people are saying they're producing extras, what all are you doing? It was maybe the difference between like an audio commentary and an interview. What is Reverend doing for both of those?
So when it depends on the company, but it's kind of same function ultimately for everything. So let's say Shout Factory comes to me with a title and they say, hey, we've licensed X. We'd like you to do it. Here's the budget. Here's the due date. What do you think? And I'll go, yeah, I can. Yeah, that's good. That's great. And then they just turn me loose. And that's been a wonderful thing with them, especially they've never really said, I can't think of a time they've said no to anything that I've come up with for ideas for these things. So the next step for me is I make a wish list. I start digging around. Okay, who's alive? If it's something I know about, I might even know, there's this great article in Fango, because I have like dozens of boxes of all the horror magazines I've been saving from over the years. I'll pull something out and dig through. Oh yeah, I need to get him, her, the production design, and this was incredible. So I just make a wish list, and then I just start working through it, reaching out to agents, publicists, the people directly is the best way if I can. And then once they come on board, if they agree to do it, that I'm scheduling a location and a crew, or I'm shooting it myself. And so I set dates where I block interviews, 3 or 4 in a day maybe, and then the next day 3 or 4 more. But I have crews all over the place, so I can, I have most countries and certainly all over the US covered with people. And so regardless of where anyone is, I can set up either an in-person interview or do the commentary. And commentary can be done in a studio, and that can even be done remotely. Like on Town That Dreaded Sundown, I had a historian in Texarkana, Texas. And then I also had me on the other end of it in Cedar Rapids, Iowa, in this surf guitarist basement. Then we were connected and just recording on both ends. Then on the opposite end of that spectrum is going into a studio. There's a couple that I really love in LA, and getting people together on the tracks in person, which adds a whole new, a very important, I think, layer of connectivity between folks.
Right.
And then, so let's say that we get these interviews booked. I have the dates. I have my crew lined up. If I'm going to be there, I try to be there as often as I can. If not, I'm conducting remotely through a laptop, which is, especially since COVID, has been more accessible and more acceptable to people. But then I go about the research. So for each interview, I'm digging as far back as I can, and I go way back. Like I have subscriptions to all kinds of things like newspaper archives, and I'll get back into their college yearbooks and seeing what kind of productions they were a part of and what really made them tick prior to the thing that we're talking about. Because I really try to, especially with Shout Factory, wanting individual interviews instead of all-in documentaries. Like Sleepaway Camp was all in. Really, the last one that was all in for me, I think, might have been Silent Night, Deadly Night 1 and 2. The second one was everybody in one. But for the most part, they want individual interviews. Point being that then I can really spend some time with the person and I can go through their whole history.
Right.
And really, and then so then I'm doing all the research. I'm writing the questions. If it's an interview, a commentary, I have notes that for whatever road we take, I follow them. Or I may lead, if depending on how the person is, and just to make sure I'm covering all the territory, that people want to hear about for the most part. And then I go and I'm in the room and I'm setting up gear. I'm schlepping gear, setting it up. We're setting the shot and the lighting. We're making, the locations can be any number of hazards for audio, especially in these things. And so we have to scout this stuff out and practice through it a little bit. And then I'm conducting the interview, and then I'm taking the footage, and then I'm bringing it home or having it sent to me. And then I'm cutting everything and getting the files. And then at that point, I'm also accumulating other materials like photos from the production, behind the scenes footage, and then assembling the whole thing, putting it all together, and then delivering it to the people. And throughout that, I'm keeping in touch with the team about what I'm doing. So I'll send an update every few weeks to Shout. Here's the full list. Here's the title. Here's everybody I have shot. Here's everybody that I'm working on. Here's everyone that I'm still trying to get, might not make it. I don't know. I'm trying. But I keep going on these things until the absolute 11th hour. And that's another great thing about Shout. And it's, for better or for worse, it's also resulted in some things not being listed on packaging. Like even on Dead Silence, James Wan isn't on there. But I was dead set on James being a part of it because he said he would. And then it became a scheduling conflict because he's so busy with Megan stuff at that time. And finally, I'm not kidding, the day it was due, we shot him. So the footage had to be, it was shot, and I had to conduct that one remotely because it came up out of nowhere. Like one day, like, okay, now he's ready and it's tomorrow. We need hair and makeup. We need this and this. And I'm like, you got to scramble. Yeah. And that's the other part of this too, is there's so many curveballs from all around. So many personalities involved. There's no real easy path through to the finish line on these things.
Right.
But with James, it's kind of unfortunate and kind of funny. You can tell when reviewers or people who are noting stuff do watch the features versus just listing what's on the back of the box, because same thing with the Friday the 13th box set. I don't think any of my stuff is listed on the box at all. I don't think it's anywhere. You have to go to the second screen in the menu. Yeah. But when you go, you find, here's a whole thing with Alice Cooper on He's Back, the music video. Here's a remastered music video that we retransferred for that release. Here's a conversation with Amy Steele. I mean, so I am pushing all the way through to the very end to get these things and get as much crammed into them as I possibly can, and then delivering and then on to the next. So that's the general process outside of promotions and speed bumps and hiccups and stuff like that.
Well, and those speed bumps and hiccups are no easy feat to come over. I'm sure, especially when you have upwards of 40 to 50 projects probably pending at any moment.
Yeah, but you learn there are threads, there's commonalities.
Of course.
It's kind of the same things that might crop up here and there. And so scheduling issues tend to kind of work the same for the most part. Someone can't make it all of a sudden. Okay, well, we'll get him in another day. I have someone else that I can then slide into that slot. And then we're still making our day. And we're still maximizing the investment that I've made on location, on crew, any other rental stuff that I have to do. Because I want to use every dollar. I have to. The budgets on these things are minuscule.
Right.
So I have to maximize all of that. The only difference being between Shout and the others, like Paramount, as you can imagine, they have more of a process involved where get the assignment, and then I have to write a pitch on who and what I want involved. Then marketing looks at it, and then the legal looks at stuff, and then things have to get approved, which has been a wonderful process with them. I mean, it really isn't cumbersome at all. I'm so grateful. The experience with Paramount has just been, I'm over the moon about my relationship with them. I love them so much. And it's an unexpected openness to things with them, where and the archive team that I work with there is second to none. I mean, that shout, I'm clawing to find stuff. And a lot of these things, especially more obscure films, there might not have been an on-set photographer.
Right.
So I'm just reaching out to anybody saying, hey, sorry to bother you. I see that you did makeup on this. Did you take any pictures? Do you have like a single Polaroid? Right. I mean, but at Paramount, the beauty of that, one of the beautiful things is I can go to the archive team, like, okay, what do we have? And then they send me proof, and I'm like, this. Then they get it to me. I mean, it's such a wonderful process to have it all from internally. And then, so it just depends on the company in terms of the process and how it works. But generally, my process and my research and everything is very much the same.
Well, you brought up legal. So one of the things that I wanted to ask, I had somebody not believe me when I told them about this the other day, is that a lot of these special features, they have to be, well, pretty much all have to be approved by the studio if it's a studio release. But on top of that, there are certain studios, not Paramount that I know of, and I won't name names, but some that will literally gut things that are like part of a commentary because it's something they don't want said about the production, something that references a negative quality about somebody in Hollywood from 40 years ago. Right. There's a couple of those that have come out in the last 5 years that you can tell there's long, awkward pauses because they didn't get a chance to re-record some things. Any experiences with that, or can you share that actually happens?
I honestly, again, I knock on wood. I haven't had too much of an issue with that. I'm very familiar with who you're talking about, the various entities, and I learned to edit for them. And I'm not a red meat. I use this term. I'm not a red meat producer, meaning I'm not trying to lead someone into territory of dishing dirt on somebody, because to me, that's not really interesting. If it comes out organically, so be it. But, and then if they want to cut it, okay, cool. Oftentimes, if there's a long lapse, like what you're talking about in a commentary session, I will go back to that person and say, hey, there were a couple issues with legal. Can we hop on? And here's the scene. Let's connect. We'll lay something else over it. And I've only had that happen a couple times, and both times the other person was like, that's totally cool. Awesome. I get it. But I want to fill that space. I try not to have just big, long silence on those things. And really, it's just a matter of, just like anything else. You learn to drive, you learn to stop driving off the road.
Yep.
And in this, I learned so I can move quickly through the post process with a studio, because it can be laborious if you have to go back and back and back. And early on, of course, I had that happen a little more. But once you learn what different entities like, and you've worked with them a few times, then you know what to expect when you show up at that dance. And so that's definitely how I cut these things together. And I try, again, it's not that I shy away from topics that are interesting to people, but I think there are a lot of ways to approach discussions without throwing someone under the bus.
Agreed.
And you have to be considerate of the subject too. I used dancing just a moment ago. They're kind of a dance partner with you in this. Yeah. And if you're dancing with someone, you're not going to want to step on their toes. And a lot of times, this dancing thing, to take it even further, you get lost in that. What makes dancing wonderful is when you're lost. It's when you're in that person's eyes and you're whatever. And so that the romance of that moment, the magic of that moment, is in the fact that neither of you are even thinking about where you are. Right. Or you are just completely swimming in that connection. And so it's very much the same when you're having an interview or a commentary and you're really connecting with somebody. I speak for myself. When I'm really connecting with somebody, I let it lead where I'm always way over prepared. So like I said, whatever road they go down, I'm going to follow them, and I'm generally pretty ready for the most part. But that path of discovery is so wonderful. And I don't want to just go, okay, like if, have some deep emotional moment and then have to cut right to the next thing. So like they're sharing some story about their childhood, and then I go, what was the makeup process like in this? You know, like
Right.
a hard, so you have to follow that. But, and I think that in that, I mean, the point of what I'm saying is that a lot of people kind of forget they're on record.
Yeah.
I've had that happen a lot. And I mentioned Silent Night, Deadly Night 2. Eric Freeman was very much that way, where he was recently rediscovered. Justin Powell was the one who actually connected me with Eric to be able to participate in that. And this is a whole universe. Eric's like, what is happening? This is real? Yep. Like, what the fuck? And my friend
People care?
my best friend in the world is Scott Perlman, who's another producer. And he had a whole project, a documentary that he was working on called Finding Freeman, which is based on this movement for people to try to track Eric down because they love him so much in Silent Night 2. Anyway, Eric, this whole thing, he was just like a kid in a candy store. Like, what is happening? And we're shooting all this crazy stuff. But when he's got down on camera, he's just the real guy who's been away from the business for decades. And he's opening up about what he tapped into to play that character. And you know in the moment when you're hearing stuff like the connection is real, but I know this isn't going to be in the cut. I know this isn't going to be in the cut.
Right.
Because you have to have that kind of respect and consideration for them. I believe that's how I handle my stuff. So there's an element of protection built into that, and to the point of the legal and making sure that there's not these long lapses of things that have to be cut out. It's that same respect that you have for that subject when you can approach a topic that may be sensitive, that maybe they even had some bad feelings about, in a way that's not going to get them in trouble and that's not going to put the track in jeopardy with the studio or something like that.
Yeah, I obviously I'm nowhere near on your level with what you're doing, but even with stuff like this, that's come up many times where somebody I mean, even before you and I started talking, there was an actual connection there. And when you really are deeply ingrained in what you're doing, there's this mutual respect, and you kind of forget what's going on and that there's an outside world sometimes. And when you get to that point, it does feel like it's literally creating art. You're lost in this space. You are putting passion to paper or to hard drive or to whatever you're doing. And you're not thinking about asking about the makeup department or thinking about what's going on necessarily unless you have to. And yeah, it's real easy to get lost in some of these. But the important thing is that mutual respect, because I'm not here to be inflammatory about anything. You're not here to be inflammatory. So it doesn't make sense to, try to create controversy.
Yeah. And I mean, if controversy happens, it happens. I have had some pieces, like I'm blown away on Child's Play last year. I'm blown away that more people didn't pick out the David Kirshner interview stuff, because I love David dearly. He's an amazing person. He's the executive producer and executive producer on various versions of the Chucky franchise. But David's story is amazing. I could go on just for an hour talking about David he's incredible. He was the album cover artist for Neil Diamond. He won a Grammy for his cover art for The Jazz Singer. David Kirshner, producer of Child's Play, did that. He invented Strawberry Shortcake. His story is absolutely, he worked with Michael Jackson on all this crazy stuff. Hocus Pocus is his. All the Wizard of Oz revival stuff is his. I mean, the Halloween Tree, the greatest, I think, Halloween cartoon ever produced, 100% him. And so David's an amazing guy, but we ended up in this exchange, and he started sharing stuff about Tom Holland on the set of Child's Play. And I was like, whoa. And David stopped himself at one point and he goes, no, let's go. I have a good lawyer. So he said, leave it in. And then, so he said that in the moment, but even so, afterwards, as I was cutting this together, I messaged him. I'm like, are you still sure you're cool with this? And he goes, yeah, go ahead, man. It's fine.
Wow.
So it's in there, and I'm not going to say what it is, but I'm shocked that it kind of lets me know how few people that are on the reporting side of things really, and I know it's a lot, especially on usually I have 5 or 6, sometimes 10 interviews on these things. I understand that's a lot to dig through for a single review. I totally get and respect that. But, I encourage everyone to watch David's if they do want to get a little more into territory that typically doesn't end up on this kind of stuff. He was totally cool with it though. So it did go there.
Wow. That's, That's one of those releases that I've actually tried to hawk to people multiple times because the special features alone are so worth the upgrade from everything else that we've ever gotten for that franchise.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And I saw someone, the Child's Play 3 is one.
Yeah.
I have this thing about movies that haven't gotten a lot of love or that haven't been thoroughly explored that I just go completely overboard. And Child's Play 3 was that, not because it's my favorite in the franchise, but it just ended up that I ended up getting a lot more people. And I'm like, let's keep going because it's been so bare bones forever. And it's kind of the one that everyone points to and goes, but there's more there. Like Jack Bender, the director, Game of Thrones, all this huge stuff that he's gone on to do, Lost. Initially hesitant to come in on that one to participate. Finally, he comes on board, says, well, my wife kind of talked me into this. She said, this is my chance to do, which I've had happen several times. And that commentary that I had with him on it was so amazing because we're watching the movie and you're hearing his revelations. He says, Justin, I bought into the negative hype. I bought into all the naysayers for so many years. I thought I made a bad movie and I've stayed away from it and I haven't watched it, not since it came out, because I honestly felt kind of embarrassed of the fact that I had done this. He said, but this is good. And you hear him, sometimes he does fall silent for a moment. And that's when I'll let the silence roll a little bit because I can see that it's happening. And then he'll be like, wow, look at that shot. When we did that, and then he'd tell the story about it. And by the time it was done, he thanked me for the experience. He's like, you helped me like this again. And I could go grab it. I had a DVD as a backup copy because I always send a digital version to the studio that I'm going to record in. And I always bring the Blu-ray or DVD or whatever as a backup just in case. I had the DVD and he had signed the release. And so I had everything kind of sitting on a table. And he goes, can I see that Blu-ray? And he grabs it. He slips the cover out, reaches over on the engineer's desk, and there's a pen. And he writes, Justin. He's like, thank you for helping me love this. Jack Bender. He signed it and he slipped it back in there and he put it back, handed it back to me. And I don't ever ask for autographs or anything, but like what a real moment, because that helped him do something. That really helped him in a way. And the same thing with Alex when I was talking to Alex on the first one, it's happened a few times, like with Felissa Rose at the end of Sleepaway Camp, she starts crying. Alex starts talking about Don Mancini and what an incredible human being he is. And Alex is so grateful for what Don has brought to his world, just like Felissa at the end of Sleepaway. And one of the things I always end with, which is often a bit of a tearjerker, is what's your relationship with the film now? And Felissa just paused in the Sleepaway interview and she looks at me and then her eyes just well up and she goes, it gave me everything. And she starts crying. It gave me my kids. It gave me my husband. It gave me my world. And then she nods as tears are rolling and then I fade out. Eric Freeman at the end of Silent Night, Deadly Night 2, I asked him the same thing. And you see this moment of revelation. He's looking at, he's like, I wish there was someone else on screen other than me because he's very hard on himself. But he said, I think I'm getting it. I think I kind of understand now. And then he's looking at the floor and then he goes, and you just sort of see something settle in him, like an acceptance of this thing that he had shied away from for so long. And then I call cut. And the camera starts to unsettle and it shuts to black. It was a moment that I didn't even notice when I was shooting. But when I'm cutting that together with my editor, Mike, at the time, I'm like, go back to that. No, we need to keep that because you see the moment Eric realizes that this is such a big thing for so many people and that he's an important part of something. And it's on camera. And I had several people write to me after that release came out because you see, like I said, the camera kind of unsettles as they're unhooking something and then they shut it off. And I ran it all the way through in the piece to just the hard out. So, and a couple of people wrote to me, they're like, you didn't cut. There's a rough edit in there where the camera's moving around. Like, did you mean to do this? And I don't know if they meant that as a jab or something, but I'm like, I did. That was the moment. Yeah. There are moments throughout that thing, but that's really the moment. And Same thing on this commentary with 3 and Jack Bender. And it's just like, you never know what the person is going to get out of it too. Yeah, it's great. It's exciting for me and for the audience to get to take this stuff in and hear these stories, and for me to catalog the history and all that. But it's really special. It infinitely compounds the wonder when you have that moment where you see this arrive on a person and they walk away a little bit different from the discussion or the interaction or whatever it was than they were when they walked in the door. That's all the money in the world couldn't match that for me.
It's so... There's so much depth in all of that. And a lot of those, you can tell it's not just silence. It's like a physical manifestation of vulnerability.
Yeah.
And grabbing onto those human moments is really what makes these physical releases so important to me. It's one of the things, other than on some of these, like the film school aspect, you can learn so much about the way these were made, but just the people behind them. Many of these we're about to lose forever. The generation of filmmakers that are about to be on the way out, sadly, not to make it less gravity than it should be, but there's about to be a huge number of them because of the way that the Hollywood system was built, and it's about to be very painful for pretty much the rest of cinema history, because that's just how it's going to go on. And when you get stuff like those moments, it might be the only time that something like that is ever captured for somebody.
That's true. And it might not even be that moment. It could just be the conversation. Right. Like on Big Trouble in Little China, I had no breaks at all because I pretty much every release, there you go. On that one, look at the list of special features on that. It's absolutely asinine. And I don't think they're even all on there.
No, they're not.
Yeah, it says, and much more. Because it was like I had no breaks. I unabashedly love that movie so much. It is an absolute masterpiece. But also, pretty much the entirety of the history on that film has been focused on Kurt. As much as I love Kurt, I did commentary.
Kurt and John, yeah.
Kurt and John. But I mean, in terms of promotional side of things and the marketing, it's all built around Kurt Russell, which I get. Star of the film, right? But he's one in a very large cast. And it's like, so there's a lot of people there that haven't had much attention. Yep. And so I started reaching out to the Peter Kwongs and to the Carter Wongs and all these guys who really are the other heart
of the
film.
Yeah.
They make the movie. You hit it right on the head. As much as I love Kurt, I did Breakdown with him years later with Paramount. And that was amazing commentary. But his story is told, right? So on this, I'm like, everybody else, this is such a huge playground. And I just started going. And I way overspent my budget. I went into the red on the whole thing, but I just didn't want to stop because almost everyone that was coming in to talk to me was saying, this is the first time I've been interviewed on this.
Gosh.
Or this is the first time I've been interviewed on this in the States, or whatever. Carter, after I interviewed him at the height of some riots over in Hong Kong. And he was so grateful and so kind. And after the interview, he sent me a framed photo of himself in this like meditation garb. It's in a gold leaf frame. And it says, with love from Carter, thank you for your kind consideration. Wow. Like, because he is this invisible player, but Carter Wong is an icon. He's like he's like Elvis over there. He can't go anywhere because he's such a legend. And here he's been in so many things that people might not even, they'll recognize his face for sure. Yeah. But he is such a huge part of this film, and the interview just meant so much to have had that opportunity to chat with him. And so what we're talking about is, you mentioned this may be the only chance you have. It's not about my chance. Yeah. That's irrelevant. It doesn't matter who's in this chair. It matters that we capture some of this, because these guys are not going to be around forever, and they're not going to be accessible forever. And there are some who have left the business and won't be heard from again. On Dead Silence, both those guys were kind of like, I think we're ready to be done talking about Dead Silence now. Like when it was done, because they have a complicated history with the film, but they came on board to do this, and they did it, and they gave some incredible conversations and materials for those pieces. But like if I would have just given up on James, which I could have, and we could have had this thing turned in on time, like way in advance or something, then that history is lost. That opportunity would have been out the window. That's why I think it's worth pushing. And so I'm a huge proponent of continuing to mine as long and as deep as we can on these things to collect those stories, because it doesn't matter who it is, they were key players. One of my favorite commentaries ever is with the animal trainers on Willard, talking about rats and stuff. That's one of my absolute most treasured memories from commentary work, because those guys were so fascinating, but they had never done anything like it before ever. And they've been in had animals in hundreds of films, everything from massive to small indies. Nothing but amazing stories. So it was a wall-to-wall discussion. But prior to it, they were both so nervous. Like, what do we do? What do we say? What if I bump the mic? And what? And it was so charming how they were as excited as I was to talk with them. And that might not be the most obvious track to hit play on. But for those of you who have Willard on Blu-ray, please listen to that track, because these guys are legends and they're animal lovers and they go about their work compassionately. I'm a huge animal lover myself, vegetarian, and I don't condone animal violence for film, for art, or for whatever. And I was really impressed with their story. And on top of that, it's endlessly funny and fascinating. So anyway, everyone's worth the trip. Everyone's worth the interview. There isn't a single person a part of any of these things that wouldn't offer something amazing in that chair, So
well said. And I mean, even I know that you did the features for the disc, but I don't know if you got this. I'm sure you did, but the interview. But we had Bryan Cranston on a release of Alligator.
That one is Michael Felsher. I tip my hat to him, because on that one, Michael was shooting him for some other things, and it came together so beautifully. And I think it's the first release that Michael from Red Shirt Pictures, like I mentioned, he gave me early opportunities on Prince of Darkness and stuff, and I've always given him nothing but praise. I call him the sort of modern godfather of this world, because he really was for Anchor Bay, for a lot of these companies. I mean, he wrote the book. I collect his stuff and I keep releases with his work on them. That was exciting for me on Alligator, not just because of Cranston, but because it was the first chance that Michael and I had to really come together on something, I think, since the Prince of Darkness days and Town That Dreaded Sundown and stuff like that. So I was so thrilled for that. And I think he's nominated, his interview with him's nominated for a Rondo, which is wonderful. So, I mean, you see, if he wouldn't have taken that shot, if Michael wouldn't have asked, then Cranston wouldn't even be on that disc. And then I have all this other stuff on there too. There's some incredible stories behind it. And then that led to a very fruitful relationship with Louis Teague, the director. And I just did Lady in Red for Carlotta Films out of France with Louis. And then prior to that, I did, Two Evil Eyes. No, wait. Cat's Eye. It was Cat's Eye for Studio Canal. And so like this thing with Louis and I just keep coming together. And it's a great thing that all began with Alligator. So you never know where these roads will lead.
And a lot of people, they never would have asked, because production, he was just a PA back in the day. So what could he say? But it's literally one of the most beloved special features from all of 2022.
Absolutely. It's a gem. Michael hit a home run with that. Yeah.
Okay, so some of the other questions that have come up about this, we have a lot of people that seem to get confused with why different iterations of the same film can't carry on just all of the special features. Can you explain how these all have rights as well and have to be signed and all that?
Yeah, definitely. It's the legal thing. It really boils down to that, because you think about especially early special features, they either had very loose releases that are cool, or they were sort of what we would say like landlocked or stuck on an island for just that release.
Right.
Many releases are very restrictive intentionally, so something can't move around. That certainly does happen. So that's why I always tell people, don't throw away that Blu-ray. Don't throw away, because you never know what might not come forward. And if you want the complete story on Halloween or The Thing or whatever, you're going to want to piece together a collection of these various releases. It's really just boils down to legal, usually. Now, foreign stuff is a little bit different, because they would have to license those in addition to the film. So if they're, sub-licensing something like a Corman film from Shout Factory or something like that, they might not have the funds to be able to pull the special features with it, but they may, or they may pick and choose. I've had some of those too. I did a release of King Kong for Studio Canal where the features had to be sort of redone because the same edits couldn't travel. There was like a thing. So if you were to pick up the Studio Canal version of King Kong 76 and in the Shout Factory, the interviews are slightly different.
Yep.
Mostly the same, but slightly different between the two. So there can be some fine lines in that, but for the most part, it's down to legal. It's similar to TV series who have licensed music in them, like The Wonder Years was forever anchored under the ocean. Because that's all music, and the music is the heart of the vibe for every single episode, masterfully used. That show is a masterpiece. And so everyone is just like, well, just put it out. And so they did with these Muzak versions of, and one or two notes are off. Right. The vibe is lost, like the magic is gone. I think they eventually did straighten that one out, but it makes me wince when I find Charmed on TV. I love that song at the beginning, but in syndication, it's gone. It's like a generic version of it, and the heart's ripped out. So darn you lawyers, you're the ones who were doing all this, but so be it. I think there's a lot more forward thinking now with these kinds of releases than there were historically, because future media wasn't always an assumed thing.
True.
It wasn't always well, there will be a next level after film. Like my dad talks about, I never thought I'd see these movies again. I thought, growing up, and you see it once, you may see it once in revival when you're in college 10 years later, but probably assuming you're never going to see this thing again. And for us, we're lucky to have grown up at a time when we can sort of assume that there'll be another version of this of some sort. But we could have never predicted 10 years ago that 4K would be what it is now, and beyond that. So, yeah, I think these companies are thinking about that more now.
Well, with these 4K releases and your relationship with Shout Factory, if you can't answer this, I understand. Is it possible to explain why some of these, and in many cases, most of these, are getting just the exact same special features and not getting anything added on the 4K release? I
can't really speak to the company's perspective on that. I'm a hired gun for them. I don't work for Shout Factory, so I'm certainly not a part of the bigger decisions being made with the company. But what I assume is that they're investing this time around. We're investing in the transfer. Yeah. So we're doing a new scan, which can be a very pricey process.
Always. Yeah.
4K, UHD. There's different levels of how many times a film is run for the different levels of 4K and high definition that you get, and that's a serious investment. And then you're also reproducing the discs, oftentimes doing new packaging and artwork and things like that. So you have all the same costs associated. It can be tough to justify shoehorning in new features when you're having to spend so much already, because really you're paying for a second time to transfer the same film.
Right.
And it's an incredibly pricey process. That's what I've always chalked that up to. There are some where we do get to do that, where we do get to throw a few extra things in. But I just think it's the cost associated with the new transfers, which Shout Factory does invest in. There are companies out there who don't. There are some companies who put stuff out on Blu-ray, and it's the literal same thing that was on the DVD that you have sitting next to it on your shelf. And I'm proud that Shout doesn't do that, unless they're forced to by a studio or something.
Yeah, Shout has done a lot of great things over the years. I don't think anybody can fault them for that at all. The amount of special features that we would just plain never have. I mean, we just showed Big Trouble in Little China. The back cover is that full and doesn't encompass everything. That is insanity. And we're getting that not only from Shout Factory, but you're helping companies like Vinegar Syndrome or one of their old partner labels. You've done TerrorVision, one that we haven't mentioned tonight at all. I believe you did this release for Ronanflix, right?
Yeah.
Any fun stories with that one? Because that one, I feel like that release still goes under the radar quite a bit.
It does, and I think it's just because the kind of limited distribution. Because of Ronin's limited. Now, I think because they did the box set version, which you have the disc of there, but also then there was the standard release that doesn't have a slip or anything. I think that one's done fine, and that carries over as far as I know, most, if not all, the special. No, I think it's most of the special features, maybe not all. But that was a real passion project because I'm friends with Scott Beck and Brian Woods, who made the film. They're also the writers of A Quiet Place and 65, which just came out, and The Boogeyman, Stephen King's The Boogeyman coming up, and wonderfully talented guys. We're all from Iowa. And I remember working on their student film stuff back in the day. And
wow.
When Haunt came out, the studio, I can't remember what studio it was, they just threw it onto DVD at Walmart.
Yeah.
It wasn't even a Blu-ray. There was no plan for a Blu-ray at all. And so I call the guys and I'm like, what? And they're like, well, blah, blah, blah. So anyway, long story short, we ended up being able to work this out. And I'm sure that involved a lot of polite nudging from them to Universal or whoever it was. I think it was Universal. And we eventually got this to happen. Now, Ronan, I have a good relationship with through Cliff McMillan from Shout Factory, also is one of the primary guys at Ronan, one of the co-founders. And so Ronan is very open in terms of stuff. Like, they don't have a real genre that they stick to. They became known for martial arts and they moved into a lot of different realms. And that openness I knew would serve this release well, because Scott, Brian, and I came up with some wild ideas for stuff to include in this thing. When I pitched it, luckily everyone at Ronan, Cliff included, was just like, oh, we love this movie. Yes, let's try to make this happen. And then everyone came to the table and it worked out great. And then we just kind of went wild. So there's early home movies from Scott and Brian on there. Yeah. We have, and this was at the height of COVID. I mean, height of COVID. And I did some in-person interviews at a haunted house in the Quad Cities where they're from. And my friend Justin Markson played the clown in that. And that's another one where he started crying during the interview, talking about Scott and Brian and their relationship, And then everyone else that was all off doing wonderful big things, I had to connect remotely with. And then built a documentary, did a new commentary. And then the packaging was such a masterstroke. And the guys at Ronan, I have to tip my hat to, because they came up with the idea of the wallpaper from inside the haunt lining the box. And then we had magnets, some enamel pins. There's poster reproductions, including the poster that's on the wall in the bad guy's room in the haunt. It's like the map of the maze. What an outside thing. But we were so excited that they were cool with that being in there. So it's a complete treasure trove for fans of the movie, of the genre, a real love letter to indie horror, and a big moment for Scott and Brian. Yes, Quiet Place had really happened simultaneously with that film that was being shot while Quiet Place was coming out and getting all this acclaim and stuff. And now they're off with the studio deals and everything under the sun. So it's this really unique moment where these true indie genre-loving filmmakers, these visionaries from the time they were kids, got to make this movie. And we got to finally give them what so few directors really get, especially on an indie level, which is a true deluxe release of their movie in a ridiculously over-the-top package full of so many tchotchkes and extras that it's really irresistible. But you're right, that flies under the radar. I think it's still available, that box set at ronanflix.com. I mean, you got to check it out. It's amazing. It's amazing.
It is one of my favorite releases from that year. It was one of those things that when it shows up at your door and you open, and if I remember right, the box itself, the cardboard box it came in, was made for the release.
It was.
And it's like, this is almost stupid how amazing this is, that they took this much time and energy to make you appreciate a movie like Haunt, which honestly, the movie itself flew under the radar when it got released too, because it didn't get this wide distribution. And it's not a bad movie. It's really well made. It's super independent, super fun. And on top of that, it came out as haunts themselves were getting to be this massively popular thing. And now there's groups everywhere that are dedicated to haunted houses and everything. So it's amazing. It's a perfect time capsule.
It is. And the pieces that came together on it were really remarkable, because we were talking early on about the score, which is from Tom and Andy. Legendary. I mean, I still have my Killing Zoe CD from Tom and Andy from back in the day. It's always one of those scores that I'm a huge score junkie. I'm always like, all right, but have you heard this one? You got to check it out. I love to turn people on to weird stuff. And that's always been one of them. And when we reached out to them, Scott and Brian connected me with them, and they were like, yeah, let's put it on there. So if you buy, I think that's the big difference between the regular Blu-ray and the box set, is that there's a second disc in there on that box set that is just the Tom and Andy score, which is not available anywhere else. Well, I think actually it's now, a couple years later, it's finally hitting vinyl or something. But at that point, especially, it was not available anywhere else.
And that very much highlighted on the back says includes limited edition CD.
Yeah.
So yeah, that is the only place at that time, at least, that you could get it.
Yeah. I mean, like you said, what a great celebration of something. And it's a real tribute to the indie spirit. And again, being kind of, well, let's try this. Let's just throw it at the wall. Let's see if it sticks. Because it might. Maybe Tom and Andy will say yes. And lo and behold, they did. So thank God.
One of the things too that you can really see the difference on some of your releases that you've had a hand in is that you're so tied to the indie, like we just showed with that. But what is the difference between working on an indie type of release and then this major studio release from Paramount? How are they different? How are they the same, other than the massive archive at Paramount, of course?
Yeah. Well, let me touch on TerraVision for a moment, because I just signed on with them last month. Brad. Yeah, that's TerraVision. So TerraVision has started as a sub-label for Vinegar Syndrome. And then they quickly realized that, wow, there's so much more we want to do. We want to do our own thing. And the record label had been very successful already. And so they moved out onto their own. And now TerraVision is independent of Vinegar and doing their own thing. Brad from Vinegar moved over there. And then we started talking about, well, maybe we can team up. Maybe I can do some features, maybe whatever. And then it kept growing and growing. And now it's a 3-man operation, really. I mean, there's in addition to the artists, I mean, like the heart of it is Ryan Graveface, Brad, and then me. It's like I'm the third man. I like to say I'm like the Hulk Hogan. Remember, and did you watch wrestling in the 90s?
Oh, yeah.
Remember the whole thing about the third man in the NWO, and then Hogan made it himself. Anyway, I'm like, I'm the third man in TerraVision. It's so nerdy. But it's really exciting because they're truly growing something in a grassroots way. It's from that heart that we've been talking about. You know, what made, like at Shout Factory, Jeff and Cliff push and push and push until the miracle of a Friday the 13th box happened.
Right.
It still blows my mind that they were able to accomplish that. TerraVision, everything is for the right reasons. And they're really doing things with the audience in mind. And their creative energy in how we discuss things and how we're approaching these projects is so incredible. And it just really invigorates all of us, I think, creatively. And I'm creating trailers for movies that never had trailers. Just the stuff I'm able to work on there is so exciting because it's the essence of a lot of ground level indie cinema, which is where there's so much passion poured into it, free of influence from layers of producers and studio notes and all this other stuff that can sometimes water down some other things. So it's like pure artistry. It's like an indie gallery. And I'm thrilled to be a part of that team and working with them. Video Violence, the one that you held up, it was under the Vinegar banner still at the point where that one came out. And groundbreaking shot on video stuff. But for that one, I was just editor. So they sent me the things and I cut everything together that had already been shot because everyone was kind of self-shooting themselves at that point for the most part, I think, if I remember correctly. And so the experience at TerraVision, though, like now I can really speak to TerraVision. Video Violence, again, was very early and just an editing gig. Now I'm A to Z creating all this stuff, mixing things, cleaning up films. I'm I can't even say because we have so much going on and we haven't announced, but it's truly thrilling. And every day is just such an organic, creative investment without boundaries, outside the legal ones that are prescribed, of course. But, really, it's amazing. Whereas, and Paramount is similar in the creative juice that I have and the passion for this stuff. Like you held up Red Eye, for example, which is another under-discussed film. Wes Craven, this is latter day Wes Craven. And a lot of people kind of discount that time in his career. And I think it's an unfortunate thing to do because if you watch this film, it's really an exercise in tension.
Yep.
He does in that plane, kind of like what Romero did in Night of the Living Dead in that house, where the ghouls at that time were the pressure on this pressure cooker. That was the temperature rising, but it was the people inside where the true ugliness and brutality and the conflict and the survival and all of that. What a masterpiece Night of the Living Dead is. I just went to the cemetery for that when I was in Pennsylvania 2 weeks ago as I was traveling through, and I'm hustling on this trip. I was driving from Iowa to Pittsburgh to Baltimore, then to New York City, back to Baltimore, to Cleveland, and then back. Interviews all over the place and stuff, shooting stuff. Anyway, passing through Pittsburgh, and I was just pulling into town as the sun was starting to set. And the cemetery is probably about 20 or 30 minutes north. I had to do it. I'm like, that movie is so instrumental for me. So I had to go up there and check it out. And I'm by myself. They're coming to get you, Barbara. And I'm like trying to I have the movie playing on my phone, and I'm trying to take pictures of the headstones the same way. Total geek moment. And then I just turned off my phone and just sat there in it, just absorbing the history, feeling this. It was really powerful and really awesome.
There's that vulnerable silence again. Yeah,
totally. Absolutely. And I have to make myself vulnerable in all this too, because I'm opening him up in the discussions. I'm opening up about a lot of things. But the thing with Red Eye is that and I think maybe because this is such a misunderstood part of Wes's career, there was a lot of Wes Craven Presents stuff happening at this time.
Yep.
And so I wanted to get someone who was a part of it who could speak to the greater picture. And that was Patrick Lussier. So Patrick I mentioned my DP Mark being a creative co-pilot for me in a lot of ways. Patrick was that for Wes for many years. They were working together on things. Patrick was directing things for Wes, certainly editing for Wes, but they were very in sync with each other through the ups and downs and the twists and turns all the way to the very end. They were close. And so I had Patrick come in for commentary, which was absolutely wonderful. And then I had this historian, John Woolley, who wrote a book about Wes, did a little interview piece about sort of what brought Wes to the dance at that point and where this positions in his career. And the whole thing just really, it's an example of similar to Shout Factory, similar to TerrorVision, where Paramount was like, yes, Patrick, yes. And John, yes. They were as there's a lot of horror love inside the company, big time, especially with their head of marketing, right. Todd, and kindred spirits for sure. But they totally understood what I was going for there, and so there was no pushback on any of that, and it became a really rich release of something that I think is kind of flying, pun intended, under the radar for a lot of people, and I hope they check it out. And on 4K, it looks and sounds absolutely incredible. The process wasn't entirely different on the TerrorVision releases now to the Red Eye experience with that, outside of the fact that I was doing a lot less on Red Eye than I do on the TerrorVision stuff.
All right, my friend, I will shout out some rapid fire questions, and then I'll let you get back to your night. Okay. Probably some obvious ones for you. What is understated with Reverend that does not get seen enough, that isn't Willard or Haunt or something that we've covered tonight that people should really check out?
A recent one is I've started doing some things for Paramount that are for streaming, which is unusual for me. This is kind of new. And Marcus Dunstan has a film, as well as, and Yoko Okamura, two directors that have recent movies through this Paramount and Epix and MGM relationship. So they're on streaming. And so the streaming stuff has special features on it, but not through everywhere. So it's not
interesting.
It's not available through every streaming service, but I think like on iTunes or Apple, whatever you call it, you have the special features that come along with it. So those are kind of neat, and that's a recent thing. I'm scrolling through the releases here just to look back because it's hard to remember. But Breakdown from Paramount is one that I'm so incredibly proud of, but I almost hesitate to bring it up because all of the Paramount Presents stuff is limited edition. I don't remember how many thousand they print, but I think that one's out of print now. It came out in 2021.
I believe it is.
Absolute passion project for me, and I got honored to have Martha De Laurentiis's final interview.
These special features aren't on the imprint release of Breakdown, right?
Completely different.
Right.
Yeah, imprint was weirdly came out right before ours, not far before. But that's one of the part of the good fortune of having the archive team, for example. There's this alternate opening sequence that for the imprint release, they only had screenshots of. And then for ours, we were able to find it in archive and include it in full. And it also has Jonathan Mostow commentary as an option over that. So, the Martha De Laurentiis interview, Jonathan Mostow, and the Kurt Russell commentary. I got Kurt and Jonathan together in a room, and it was absolutely magical. So, man, I hope that gets back into the general catalog at some point. I think that's in the plan, but even if, I don't know, if you can find this, if you're a fan of Breakdown, which everyone I've met who has seen the movie loves it.
Oh, it's incredible.
This release is an absolute love letter to that film and to all that those guys created. Looking through here, The Hand was Oliver Stone's first studio picture. Yeah. And that's one that has, I had a really candid conversation with Oliver for that about this point in his life. And he admits during the conversation, he's like, I was working through my divorce on screen. He said, I should not have been making a movie then, especially a movie about a relationship falling apart. And, right. And he looks back and he's like, God, he was so open in the discussion. Really talk about vulnerability. He really made himself available in that conversation. And then it was Pressman, the producer, his final interview. He just recently passed away with his wife, Annie, who she's in the film as one of the leads. So The Hand was kind of an unexpected thing. On House of Wax, I got Paris Hilton for that, which was wild. The Last Castle. Have you seen The Last Castle?
Yeah.
James Gandolfini, Robert Redford, Mark Ruffalo. That's your top lining trio there. And this is through Paramount. This one is still available. But the brief story on that one is that it came out, it was in the editing suite when 9/11 happened. And their marketing campaign was it takes place in a military prison where there's an overthrow that eventually happens, spoiler alert. And the marketing campaign were the two towers of a prison smoking and an upside down flag tattered in the foreground. Not the best thing after 9/11. So the whole thing got scrapped and the movie just basically went invisible. Also, they had shot a final sequence where Redford's character's daughter kind of comes to term with her relationship with her father, as at his military funeral, the flag from his coffin is presented to her, which is actually a very symbolic moment after this very complex relationship that plays out during the film. It's a heavy moment, but at the time, the director, he mentioned to me that they had shot this thing, but it never even got assembled because of 9/11. They thought it was too heavy-handed a way to end the picture. So archive team again, I went to them and I'm like, is there any of this there? Because I wanted to cut maybe a couple snippets into the interview with him, with Rod Lurie, the director. And they're like, no, I don't think so. Nothing was listing in inventory. And then they went and physically checked. And then they found everything on the day. Wow. With audio, every take, every shot.
This is the one you re-edited. That's right.
Yeah. And so this is the one that without asking, I assembled it, finding shots, blending. I'm like, oh, this would be kind of fun. I just thought it was an exercise for me. And I sent it to my executive on that one inside, and they were very happy with it. And it ended up being included on the disc. On Munster Go Home for Shout Factory, I got Rob Zombie and Butch Patrick together on that commentary. That's super special. I've told the story behind Piranha a million times about Roger Corman and Dick Miller, my relationship with Dick and Lainey, his wife, and then Dick passed away. And then Roger and I continued to do the commentary track and make it a real celebration of Dick and Roger's career, kind of a retrospective thing. That was really special. Yeah. I
just had Elijah Drenner on, and we talked about Dick quite a bit.
Oh, man. What a guy. On Harold and Maude, I got Larry Karaszewski, who's the writer of like Ed Wood and People vs. Larry Flint and all these amazing movies. I got him along with Cameron Crowe on commentary.
Yeah.
And Cameron could speak. I mean, Cameron's written an essay on the film before. I mean, he's a huge fan of the thing. And then having those two together to talk about the movie and how the music influenced it and everything, that one was really special. I mean, God, but see, like you're hearing, with all of these, there's some kind of a story.
Yep.
On Blue Hawaii, finding all this previously unseen, this massive archive of images from the production. Like nothing in the realm of Elvis is unseen anymore. But here we found all these photos no one's ever seen before. Sounds like a simple special feature, a photo gallery, but there's stuff that no one's ever had eyes on before. So that was exciting to see those show up and be one of the first people to ever see them. So I don't know, if you go to my site at reverendentertainment.com or justinbeahm.com, same website.
It'll be linked below. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you. There's a past releases are now available, it's called, and you can scroll through and look at the details for each one of them. And man, there's a story behind it. There's stories behind all of them. I'm so proud of all of them.
And that's the thing with all of them. You can tell that it's not just thrown together. This is having you on it, and not to gush for a moment, but having you on is like a really culminating moment for me, because I've looked up to your work for a long time, and not only for the inspiration behind proper interviewing technique and understanding the human aspect that is behind some of our most beloved art of all time, but seeing that you are grouping together with people like TerraVision, and not that we're best friends or anything, but Brad and Ryan, they were just on the channel recently for, I think they were on for like 2.5, 3 hours for a live show. Brad is a patron of my channel. Brad and I talk, we text, just to see that you guys are able to work together. It's like a match made in heaven for me. And I'm just so appreciative for everything that you've been able to do for all of us that love physical media. No, man,
I'm honored. I really am. And to hear about the interviewing thing and all that, just, I can't tell you how good that feels because I don't put myself in most of these things. And so for you to be able to glean that from it just means the world. And man, I mean, it's all about relationships, and it's all about connectivity. And
yes,
it's something that you and I are lucky to do, to be able to have these kinds of conversations with people, and the people who are listening and watching. I mean, that's offering them the opportunity to sort of be in the fly on the wall for that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
This is the essence of the organic element of this that I can't do in mine. I wouldn't want to. I wouldn't want to be on the screen the whole time, but for you to be able to have these genuine interactions, and it makes sense that you would connect with a guy like Brad, because his heart's in the right place, and he's doing this for all the reasons that every fan would want things to be done for. That's a huge difference between one label A versus B. And so that's who I gravitate to. I'm endlessly loyal and loving and family oriented in my worlds, in my personal life and in my professional life. And so I gravitate toward that. I really do. And so same here, coming on the show. It's a tremendous honor for me to be here. And I really appreciate the thought that you've put into the whole thing too.
That means a lot too. I'm trying to be very respectful of your time, but I can talk like 4 more hours. 2 more things. Dream project, something that you've never worked on, or something that is not in the works. What movie would you love to pour 7 months worth of, I want every single special feature, and do everything to complete it?
My white whale is Kiss Meets the Phantom of the Park.
I can see why that's a white whale.
Yeah. So if you can see over here, I have a poster. Nice. Kiss Meets the Phantom of the Park. So I'm a huge fan of the film. It hasn't ever had proper release. The closest, it was on a Good Times videotape years ago, which has been pulled up, upscaled to DVD and whatnot. But the bad thing about the Good Times tape is that it's cropped at the top. So the frame is completely wrong. When Kiss did a box set a few years ago called Kissology Volume 2, they included Phantom of the Park, but they couldn't find the elements for the US version, the Hanna-Barbera version that was on TV, that was on the Good Times tape. So they used the international version, which has different music. It's all the Hanna-Barbera cues are gone, and it's replaced with a bunch of solo album music, which at the time Kiss's solo albums were coming out. And so it's a little bit of a different feel to the whole movie. And I just so love the American version of it, the original one that was on TV. And I was fortunate enough to write for their tour magazine some years ago when they did their album Monster came out. And I ended up writing for their tour book for that. And all I wanted to do was write about Phantom. And so I did this, that turned out to sadly be the final interview with the director, Gordon Hessler, for that. And just the whole story behind the making of it is so insane. And they shot 2 full concerts, pro shot camera crews, film crews in front of Colossus at Six Flags Magic Mountain in Valencia. And free, just come show up, and they filled the parking lot full of kids. So there's all that footage somewhere. And there's the original. So, and I tried, Gene even helped me at one point, try to track this thing down to make it work. And we couldn't make heads or tails of what's become of any of it. And so all that's out there is this cropped version, which is terrible. So even if it has to be that international version re-released with special features, upscale it, let's do a 4K version of it or something. Let's try to find that concert footage. I just think it could be an amazing, all the guys are still alive.
Yeah.
They might not get along very well, but it would be so incredible to have their stories. I've met all of them individually. I wouldn't want to I wouldn't even need them in the same room. We can do the interviews on their own and maybe they'd come out better. But anyway, that's a real white whale for me. And then the other one that I always talk about that Paramount will one day stop me from talking about is Bringing Out the Dead. Scorsese's Bringing Out the Dead. I'm a huge, obviously, Scorsese fan, and also Nicolas Cage. And that movie it's another one kind of like Red Eye, where it's under the radar.
Yep.
John Goodman, Ving Rhames. I mean, this movie, Arquette, it's just an incredible film, top to bottom. It's a fever dream, a true fever dream, and unlike anything that Scorsese's ever made. And so that one is another one that I will keep pushing for. I keep pushing that boulder up the hill until I can't anymore, until I'm told to stop, because I really believe in that one day seeing the light of day again. So those are 2 that I would say for sure.
I am right there with you with Bringing Out the Dead. That desperately needs a release of some sort. And you would think with Scorsese and everything, it's got to happen.
Yeah.
Time will tell. This one, I feel like there's going to be an obvious answer, but I've been asking people, what movie, when you think about your home state, do you associate with your home state?
Iowa is most closely associated with Field of Dreams.
Of course. So
I'm sure that's the answer you thought would be. I think
it's a personal question. Yeah. What do you think?
Yeah. I think about my friends. I think about my friends, Mike and Jason, who run a company called Prescribed Films out of Little Ottumwa, Iowa, who gave me some of my first opportunity to do anything film. In fact, it was answering an ad in the newspaper for zombie extras in like 2009 for a movie they made called Collapse that had Linnea Quigley and Chris Mulkey, Karen Landry in it. They took over this town of West Branch, Iowa, and made this zombie movie over the course of like a month or something in 2009. And anyway, I just happened to answer this ad. I didn't know who they were. Zombie extra, that sounds fun. I don't know. Why not? So I show up and do the thing, and next thing you know, I'm getting makeup slapped on me by Toby Sells, and I'm wandering around bleeding and moaning, and it was an amazing experience. And that led to me meeting Linnea, which led to me doing a piece on Night of the Demons for Fangoria, which was my pitch to Fangoria, was this article. It still hasn't been published anymore because it's so obese. I interviewed like 30 people for this article with no breaks, and it hasn't been published anywhere yet. But anyway, so like that led to everything. That and Chris Alexander at Fangoria. So Mike and Jason and Chris Alexander, that's the trifecta of what led to me doing anything in this business. And I love Mike and Jason dearly. They have an event every year called Halloween-a-Palooza. It's a weekend convention in October. And I love being a part of that and hosting panels and stuff for them. They're just sweethearts. And same with Chris. Chris and I emailed today. I mean, I stay in touch. Chris was the editor at Fangoria, and we came in at the same time. He brought me in with him. And off to the races from there. I mean, it's insane. It's insane. So when I think of Iowa, I think of Collapse. I think of working on Mike and Jason's other prescribed films, like Demonica, about this roller skating rink possessed by demons. And that's what I think of. My friends who were doing this here, my friend Christian Day, who's a documentary filmmaker who works out of Des Moines, who's brought me in on everything from political campaign ads to protests during the caucuses here in Iowa, to protest kids in cages on the border. I mean, like, I think of the people that are here working their asses off in the least likely place for there to be any kind of industry relating to entertainment, but that pour every ounce of it into it, without abandon. And it's absolutely amazing what's happening. And it's not unique to Iowa. You don't have to be in LA or Georgia or Toronto to be involved with the entertainment. I mean, there's independent film festivals everywhere. And Iowa is a state that has many of them. In Burlington, there's one called Snake Alley Film Festival. I think of that too. One of the greatest international film fests I've ever attended or been a part of. Tad Good, Nikki Good, they do an amazing job with that. And so there's just so much happening here. And I'm honored to be in proximity to it and a part of any of it. And so I love Iowa. I'm very proud to be here and be from here. I really am. I go to LA, I come back, I go to wherever and come back. And there's always a walking off the plane and breathing deep and then settling. And then it's like, all right, back to normalcy. You know, I love it here.
What a deeply personal response. I love that so much. And knowing that I'm so close, it's just so nice to see that people can be excited to be here and really enthralled in something that, I mean, it's called flyover country for a reason. This gets forgotten a lot by some people.
Yeah, but if you're paying attention, if people dial in, and that's one of the great things about the homegrown horrors that Vinegar has done, those box sets where they spotlight this stuff. Bill Rebane just had that Arrow box set, Wisconsin's only full-time filmmaker and studio. There's just, and this is to TerrorVision, the line connects with that too, this regional horror stuff.
Yeah.
I interviewed a guy for some releases for Terror up in New York City the other day that he would he never had distribution. He would dupe his tapes at home deck to deck and then go to video rental stores and pitch the owners, hey, rent my tape out, you know, let's do this. Let's get my stuff on your shelves. And I have so much respect for everyone who's working on that end for everyone in the business. Don't get me wrong. I'm not saying budget has any kind of is a deciding factor on investment or passion. But I just coming from here, not growing up in LA where I can take it for granted that everything's happening all the time. It's just the hard work and the ethic that goes into this stuff. It shines, and the song's a little louder here, to me at least, where it may be part of a cacophony elsewhere. Here you hear it clearly on every project, and it leads you to very good things with good people, which is all I care about doing in this business. Hence me being here today with you. So thank you.
On that note, thank you. I mean, this has been remarkable. I hope that this has been inspiring for others, just like it's been for me, because there's so much to glean from all of these, and not only just the work, but just the person behind it and everything that you can discover.
Thanks, man. I appreciate it.
Thank you for watching The Disconnected. On the way out, make sure that you are subscribed to the channel, that you've liked the video, and that you've copied the link to be able to share with someone else that may appreciate this.